Good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you this morning. Back in 2017, my son Zach, who is my oldest son, and I traveled to Haiti with a group of high school students from our church for a mission trip. And while we were there, I stayed in Port-au-Prince with a group of students, and my son and his group traveled to a very remote village in Haiti, actually, ironically, called Bethel, and they spent the week there. They spent the week painting a church as well as getting to know a bunch of the kids in this village. Here's my son Zach with a few of those kids. And they really just wanted to get to know the kids in this village. So they played games with them, they colored with them, they played tons of soccer with these kids, and they just really wanted to show them God's love through the week. So as they went through the week, they got to know these kids, right? And my son Zach got to know this little boy that you see in the picture really well, and another little girl that I don't have a picture of, but he spent a lot of time with these two kids. And one day they decided to go to this little girl's house to do a visit. And while they were in the house, they noticed that the house didn't really seem like much of a house, at least what we're used to. It had a dirt floor, and the roof was made out of shingle or of metal, sheets of metal, all pieced together. And so it was very clear to my son that this family lived in extreme poverty. But the cool thing that happened is on the last day when they were there and they were getting ready to go, they were saying their goodbye to all the kids, this little girl runs up to my son Zach with a watermelon. And that might seem like a strange gift. And so she wanted to give this watermelon to my son. And my son was like, no, you keep the watermelon, keep it, trying to communicate with her. And she just insisted that he take this watermelon. And he found out that she had taken some of the very little money that this family had, gone to the market to buy this watermelon to give it to my son. And she, right then and there, as they were leaving, broke it on a rock so that they would eat it together. And this was a huge act of generosity on this little girl's part. And I don't think my son will ever forget that moment with that little girl and her generosity. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had someone be that generous with you? And how did that change your life? Well, this morning and over the next couple weeks, we're going to focus on the spiritual practice of generosity. Now, as we've done over the last several weeks, we've taken a minute to think about what spiritual practices are and why we practice that. So we're going to do that again, and hopefully by the end of this series, you'll have this definition of a spiritual practice memorized. But as disciples of Jesus, we want to become more and more like Jesus, right? And we cannot do that on our own. We can try really hard, but it's not going to happen on our own. We need God's help. And so spiritual practices are something that we can do that put us in a position for God to be transforming us. And I love Richard Foster's definition. He says this: a spiritual discipline is an intentionally directed action by which we do what we can do in order to receive from God the ability or the power to do what we cannot do by direct effort. So Jesus had a lot to say about this spiritual practice of generosity. And we're going to go back today to the Sermon on the Mount to look at chapter 6, verses 19 through 24. And I'm going to read this out loud to you this morning. And I'm going to break it down, okay? So I'm going to start in verse 19 and go through 24. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So let's unpack these for a little bit here. The first section in verses 19 through 21, Jesus is contrasting two different ways that we can store up our treasure, our things. We can, on the one hand, choose to store up earthly treasures, things that we are collecting here on earth. And when Jesus talks about these earthly treasures, he literally means things that we have to store up. They require us to store them up. Things like wealth and money and our stuff and our possession. And these verses remind us that those things don't last, right? We can't take them with us when we die. But on the other hand, we could and we can store up treasures in heaven. And I love what Tim Mackey from the Bible Project calls this. He calls these sky treasures. And those are things like acts of generosity, offering kind words to other people, caring for people who are sick, helping people who don't have access to clean water. It's all of those things that we talked about last week in Matthew 25. These are things that will make earth look a little bit more like heaven. That's what sky treasures are. Jesus also says in these verses that where our treasure is, our hearts will follow, right? So, if we store up these earthly things, like money or stuff or wealth, then our heart is going to follow those things. And in the end, we'll be worrying about all of that stuff and feeling like we never have enough and never being content. Those things will begin to consume us. And they will ultimately let us down. But if we choose to store up the sky treasure, things like generosity and love and kindness, then our heart will follow those things. And we will end up experiencing freedom and contentment and joy. Then, the next section in these verses, 22 through 23, these have always confused me. I didn't feel like they made sense. They were in the middle of this section where Jesus talks about our treasure, and then he talks about not having two masters. There's a section in here that talks about our eyes being like a lamp for the body. It was always very confusing to me. But as I was studying this, and with the help of the Bible Project, these verses came alive to me, and they are so fascinating, and it totally makes sense. So these verses, 22 and 23, they're like a riddle that Jesus tells. So hang in with me here for a second. This is really cool, and I want you to get it, but hopefully I can communicate this clearly enough. But in the Hebrew Bible, when they talked about someone having a good or a healthy eye, that was actually a figure of speech for being a generous person. So healthy eye meant generous person. If you had a bad or unhealthy eye, that meant you were a stingy or a greedy person. And then if we look at the word healthy in the original Greek, right? So this verse was originally written in Greek. That word is haplous. And that word actually has a few different meanings in the Greek, right? It could mean whole, complete, or it could mean generous. And scholars think that Jesus was actually saying here both of those meanings in this word. So what Jesus was saying in this section was that if your eyes are healthy, then your eyes are whole and generous. But if your eyes which are like a lamp, right? He says that our eyes are like a lamp. That's a metaphor. Then we are whole and generous, then our body will radiate light. And if our eyes are unhealthy or bad, then our eyes are greedy or stingy. And when that happens, our body will be full of darkness. So our eyes can either be a source of light or a source of darkness. Our generosity can either be a source of light or a source of darkness. And if Jesus tells us that we are to be the light of the world, then we are to radiate light out of us, which means we are to be generous. Now, Jesus concludes this section by reminding us that we cannot serve both God and money. And again, if you look at the original word in Greek for money that's used here, a better translation might be a word called mammon. And that meant something more like an accumulation of wealth and riches. It meant storing up your treasure on earth. So we can't serve God and be storing up our treasures here on earth. And if we are to be disciples or apprentices of Jesus, then we cannot be people who focus on storing up wealth and possessions just to keep them to ourselves. Jesus invites us to be generous people, to be people whose bodies radiate light because our eyes are generous. We are generous people. And friends, that is living the good life, right? Holding all that we have with open hands so that we are willing and we are ready to give it away when God invites us to do that. Just like that sweet girl in Haiti decided to take her money and offer it as a watermelon to my son. A sweet act of generosity. We are invited to be people who continually keep our eyes open so that we are able to see and to pay attention to the people that God has placed around us and to the situation and the circumstances that we are in, so that when God invites us to be generous, we can be. Friends, there are people in our Bethel community and in our city and in our state and in our country and in our world who need us, disciples of Jesus, to be generous. They need us to have healthy eyes. Now, if I am honest with you, I have a little bit of a complicated relationship with generosity. I want to be generous. But I'm not so sure if you looked at how I use my money and how I use my time and my resources, you would actually think I'm that generous. So I was thinking about this over the last week as I was getting ready to speak this morning about all the different ways that I could be generous, right? And one of the ways that I really want to be generous is by being generous with my time and my attention. But I have been in ministry for the past 25 years, and when you're in ministry that long, you have to take care of yourselves, right? I have to stay healthy. I have to focus on taking care of myself and my soul so that I can lead out of a healthy relationship with Jesus. But here's the thing. I wonder if I have become too protective of my time and have started managing my time too well so that I don't have any excess of time to give away to people. And I also wonder if this thing right here has caused me to not be generous with my attention because I have it out on the table sometimes when I'm eating with people or during a meeting. I have it on the table where it's distracting me and I'm not giving my full attention to the person that's across from me. And I'm not being generous with my attention. I also want to be a person who's very generous with their money. But I find that I spend a lot of money on stupid stuff that I don't really need. Anybody get 100,000 emails last week from Amazon about all the deals that they had? Right? We get sucked into that stuff so easily, but all of that stuff might be keeping me from being generous with the money that we have. I feel God inviting me to pay attention more to how I can be generous with my money and my time and my attention. And as college students, you might be thinking, how can I be generous with my money? I hardly feel like I have any. And that's okay. But I think there are other ways you could be generous, right? Just like I want to be generous with my time, you could be generous with your time and your attention and your gifts and your talents. There are there is a way. I know there is a way that each one of you can be generous, and it might not be with your money, and that's okay. So when you come to chapel this Wednesday, 2 days from now, World Vision will be here, and they are going to invite you to sponsor a child. And if you do that, you will be giving with your money, right, to help a child in Ethiopia get food, access to clean water, also education. But here's what I want you to do between now and Wednesday, is I want you to talk with God about it. I want you to ask God, is that something that you are inviting me personally to do, God? So that when you come on Wednesday, you'll be ready to say yes or not now. And that's okay too. I want to give you some time right now to think about and to spend some time with God reflecting on whether or not your eyes are healthy, generous, or unhealthy, maybe a little stingy or greedy. And I'm going to put some questions up on the screen that you can use to just be with God over the next few minutes. Invite him to show you how he is inviting you to be generous.